throughout my videos, I've mentioned a few times that the Canadian whiskey category can be a bit challenging to explore. So what I want to present today is a bit of a roadmap for exploring it. And I think the best way to kind of survey the breadth of Canadian whiskey is by trying to categorize some styles within Canadian whiskey. Canadian whiskey is a really, really broad category. Inherently, a lot of it is based around blending whiskeys together that have very different flavor characteristics. So incredibly broad. Classifying whiskeys in this way is hard to do. There's been some classifications of Scotch whiskey, for instance, various sort of models, which work pretty well. There's no model that's perfect, and I haven't seen anyone do this on Canadian whiskey. So this is sort of my best bet. So I went through all the Canadian whiskeys that I've reviewed, tasted, known, hundreds of them, and tried to figure out how would I broadly classify them. And this is kind of how I would tend to look at things. You have sort of a classic Canadian blend. You have blends that are contemporary, so it's a contemporary Canadian blends. You have old corn whiskies. You have rich rye whiskies. You have single malts. And then you have everything that doesn't fit in a category. And they're all, I think that's kind of a good way to go about it. So I'm going to talk about those categories and kind of what they each represent. And in the video description below, I'll have some examples in each category you can try. So I would recommend, if you haven't had whiskeys in a particular category, to try some whiskeys in those other categories. And it'll really help you kind of narrow in a bit in terms of what Canadian whiskey is and sort of some of its breadth. Just, for the sake of interest, I looked as well at, how many whiskeys that I've reviewed have fallen into each category. In the classic Canadian category, I had 18%. In the contemporary Canadian blend, I had 25%. I had 9% in the old corn, 11% in the rich rye, 23% in the single malt. It's a lot of single malts. Part of this is because the single malt category is dominated by small craft distillers who have just released all kinds of different brands. So it's not single casks, all that. So that's why that's, in terms of volume would be much smaller, but in terms of variety, pretty large. And then I had 14% that I couldn't categorize cleanly. There was one category I thought about creating, which would be a category of young whiskeys that are very oaky. There's a decent chunk of whiskeys like that. I didn't end up going that direction because I'm not sure that's a style that's going to last. I think we see a lot of those because we have small, micro distilleries trying to release product young. It's rough when it's young. You compensate with a lot of oak, and you get this whiskey that often can be a bit messy. So I don't know if that category is going to last. As stock matures, there's a chance to get out of having to do that, and I think some distilleries might take it. So let's talk a bit about the different profiles. So first of all, when I say a classic Canadian blend, what do I mean? It's a low alcohol, like low ABV, so usually sit around 40%. You have a whiskey that is light and sweet and slightly spicy. So this is kind of, and it's called it a classic Canadian blend because a lot of the old whiskeys that you saw were kind of this style, this light, sweet, slightly spicy, a slightly dry finish. And there's a number of examples. A lot of the sort of bottom shelf Canadian whiskeys are kind of in this style. If you kind of want to explore, as I said, there'll be some whiskeys in the video description. One that I've mentioned before, Centenniel. This is largely a light wheat whiskey with some rye blended in. It has all those characteristics. It's slight. There's still a bit of spice and intrigue. The rye accents to this base of corn really plays through. So that's one style. Another one that's classic and has a bit of heritage is Seagram's VO. This is kind of the one that I often pour when I want to demonstrate to people what is in this style. I think it's less of an exciting style, and I think it's a style that's misunderstood in terms of people often taste it, it's light, they don't take time to really appreciate the subtlety and understand some of the magic of blending in terms of matching a light corn whiskey and integrating it with just a bit of something that adds quite a bit of spice and intrigue. And to an extent, it's all about the edges. Like, it's all about the little subtleties going on. I really like the style, even if the palate these days tends towards richer whiskeys. So that leads us on to the second category, which I would say are contemporary Canadian blends. And these are a bit different because while the classic Canadian blends, you had, a blend of grains, but it tended to be quite light. This now you have influenced by multiple grains. So I'd say the classic Canadian blend, you have a light corn whiskey and a bit of rye is kind of how it is. It's not always that way because your base whiskey can be different. So Centenniel, it's a light wheat whiskey base, and you have rye blended in. The contemporary Canadian blends are based around the influence of multiple grains. So you have big influence from, a base corn whiskey, a rye whiskey, maybe something else as well. And so it differs mainly in terms of flavor volume and the breadth of flavor. So it's a really broad category, and it was, I debated about whether to shove so much into this category. But I think really when you think about whiskeys that are medium to full bodied, have the influence of multiple grains, where rye plays some sort of central role, that constitutes quite a number of Canadian whiskeys into this group that's fairly broad. And to me, it makes sense. So I think that category you could explore multiple types, and they fit together in some kind of classification, but it's, you might like some whiskeys in part of that category and you might not, depending on kind of what balance of grain and oak, you like. So, because they are all blends. So some examples, on the lighter side, Crown Royal Limited Edition, it's light, there's a lot going on, and it's quite on the lighter side. I think is more of a modern take on some of the classic Canadian blends. You also have whiskeys that have more of an oak influence, so like Collingwood Town Collection Double Barreled. There's a big kick of rye and oak in this, so it's stronger flavored. You get lots of floral notes, so on a flavor basis, again, quite a bit different than the classic style of blends. And then you also have, I'm running out of space here, the Gooderham and Worts brand of whiskeys, which the base one, wheat plays a central role. So Gooderham and Worts, the basic Gooderham and Worts is a combination of 4 grains. But everything in this brand, I think, falls into this category in terms of you have multiple grains at play, quite a broad range of flavors, and medium bodied in general. Another one which I'm tempted to taste, maybe I'll taste it at some point because I love it, but Crown Royal does a lot of these, modern blends. Crown Royal Winter Wheat is a really, really nice whiskey. It's the presence of rye is present beautifully, but it's not a rye dominated whiskey. There's just tons of going on, from fruit to oak to spice. So you're kind of touching on tons and tons of different flavor categories. So this is another one that would fall into that category for me. So those are kind of the main way I would look at blends. What's been happening now is there's more and more focus on rye, and this is kind of, the way Canadian whiskey is traditionally made. You have your light base whiskeys, and then you have your flavoring whiskeys. This now is focused on flavoring whiskeys. I thought about just sort of talking about flavoring whiskeys and including things like, whiskeys that are sort of made like bourbons, but there just aren't as many of those publicly available that I thought, probably what makes the most sense is a rich rye category, which is basically whiskeys that would have been used to flavor blends. And so these are whiskeys that are dominated by rye. They're mostly rye, often 95 to 100%. Really rich, really spicy, really fruity. They're aged in new oak. Care is taken in fermentation to really develop flavors. And I guess not always new oak, but I'd say active oak. You might have some, first fill ex-bourbon as well. And there's a few examples of this, and you really see it from the big distilleries. So Crown Royal Northern Harvest Rye, the big rye from Gimli in the Crown Royal Whiskies. Lot number 40 from Highwalker Distillery, 100% unmalted rye, just an awesome portrayal of rye. Nice floral notes. The Alberta Premium Cask Strength would be in this category as well. Canadian Club 100% rye. Just a brilliant display of rye. Another one which came to Ontario that I really like is Piggyback, 100% rye, 6 years old. It's made in Alberta by Alberta distillers, but bottled by Whistle Pig. Really spicy, really medicinal. So that's a really interesting style. It's really, really concentrated in rye flavors, and it's brilliant. They're quite a bit different than American ryes, which often contain a fair bit of corn, and also are often made in column stills. And so you get a different character out of those ryes. They tend to be much broader, whereas most of these rich ryes in Canada are made using some form of pot distillation, and you just get this really intense, sharp, concentrated rye character that's far less broad than most American ryes, and so they taste quite different. And I'd say on the intensity spectrum, they're a notch higher. So that's sort of a type that's come out of flavoring whiskeys. There's also a type that's really comes right out of base whiskeys, and these are old corn whiskeys, and usually you'd see those because they have big age statements on them: 35 years, 43 years, 30 years, 21 years. And these are whiskeys that are corn whiskeys in general. It doesn't preclude other things. You could have a base rye whiskey that's aged for a long time that have this characteristic. But the basic concept of this is you have the taste of age, because you have a light whiskey that goes into a cask that isn't that active and sits there for a long time. And what happens is it really just picks up the notes of maturation. And so out the other end, you get this whiskey that's fairly light, a bit sweet, really nice sort of beeswax notes. You get spice notes coming from the oak, but it's not the same as like the big rye spice. It's sort of much more subtle and different than what you find in rye. Well, there's some crossovers, but just mostly it's a lighter whiskey with just a touch. And to an extent, you could look at it as sort of a grown-up version of the classic blend, but it's different in that it's really focused around the aged whiskey notes, which are quite prominent. And if you get to know this style, you catch parts of it in, say, well-aged Scotch whiskies, but those whiskies, for instance, have a lot more character in their base whiskey that goes into the cask. So that's where this one's different. It's a whiskey style that at first I don't know that I understood, but appreciated, I should say. But as I've taken more and more time with it, I just love the style. So often what's done to it is once these really well-aged corn whiskeys or base whiskeys, come out of the barrel, sometimes they're finished, so they might be put in a sherry cask just for a touch of kind of rounding out for balance. Sometimes you'll have a bit of stuff blended in. So for instance, the J.P. Weiser's 35-year-old had a touch of rye blended in, and it was brilliant. It just still, the core focus of it is those aged corn whiskey notes, but you just get these accents of rye surrounding it that made it really nice. The Canadian Club 40-plus-year-olds as well, they've, not all of them, but they've added brandy and sherry and and some other things to kind of round those out. Pike Creek releases some old whiskeys, the 21-year-olds. They all kind of fit in this category. They're all based around, this old light corn whiskey. And some of the finishes they've done have been just really fantastic. Think about pairing new oak with old, like really old light whiskey. It's really challenging to do, and they've pulled stuff off like that without taking away from the character of the style, which is an old base whiskey. So really good. Probably the easiest entry into this style is the J.P. Weiser's 15-year-old, which is younger than a lot else in this category, but it has those characteristics, and that's where I'd recommend starting. If you like that one, explore some more in this realm. They can be a bit expensive, more expensive because of the age. That being said, for the age, you pay significantly less than you would for any other category, by factors of 4 or 5 often. So, you're often looking at, this 35-year-old I think was $150. You're not going to find that in other whiskey categories. So, that's your old corn, or more generically, I'd say your old base whiskeys. Another category that's emerging. And if I had more space, I could put more on the table, but single malts. These are whiskeys that are made from 100% malted barley. These really have come out from, micro distillers who've pursued this style. A lot of them are in Canada. They're really diverse. They're often very brightly fruity, and there's quite a few kind of grassy single malts as well in Canada, so with notes of hay, for instance. A lot of them are still young, so it's still a category that's coming into its own. There's a few that are quite nice. The ones from Shelter Point and Two Brewers, they're there already. There are some single malts that are made by big distillers, but they're generally not released. So there's a few distilleries that make them, but so that's single malt. Though the best way to explore that is to go find a craft distillery near you if you're in Canada. See if you can pick up the bottle. Some of them are available internationally, some of them aren't. But it's a style worth tracking. There's some really nice whiskeys coming out in that category, but it's one to watch and one that will get better. There's a lot that are kind of oaky, raw, and young, but I think that's just a product of starting along the path, and then over time, I've seen those single malts get quite a bit better. Last category are it's quite a big category. I think I had 14% of my whiskeys in this. Just whiskeys that are so different I couldn't really classify them. So an example would be Crown Royal hand selected single barrel. It's like walking into a candy shop. It doesn't taste really like any other style other than itself. It's one that's really worth exploring, but kind of stands on its own. There's similar whiskeys that are quite nice from smaller producers. Like Last Straw makes a stout whiskey, so it's a whiskey made from a high gravity stout mash without hops. Really unique, really nice. At 3 years old, it's a really, really nice whiskey. So you get a whole mix of things sometimes that don't fit. So that's a brief overview. I encourage you to read this section below the video that'll give some examples, and just try to explore all the categories. Once you've kind of had one in each category, if you like it, try some more in that category, and you'll start to kind of pick up what you like. And it is diverse. In Canada, it's a bit easier. There's a lot more availability. Outside of Canada, your Canadian whiskey selection can be quite sparse. So try to explore as many as you can, but if you can only get access to, say, classic Canadian blends, taste it, give it a go, but just understand, it's a portion of what's out there for Canadian whiskey, and be on the lookout for something that's different, and don't let just one style inform your whole opinion of Canadian whiskey. And of course, like I've categorized them here, there's different levels of quality. some whiskeys, in the category might be representative of some of what you can do in the category, but they may not necessarily be the best. So if you're looking for kind of the best, you start with my list, and you can look at different reviews. My list, I've tried to just include whiskeys that are commonly available, so limited editions, all that stuff. I haven't dumped into a category. And of course there's a few whiskeys that you could arguably put in one or two categories, but again, this is just a model to kind of help you get started, and I think it actually captures the Canadian whiskey scene pretty well. If you're curious about more, feel free to mention them in the comments, and happy to discuss further on this stuff. So that's it. Enjoy. I think Canadian whiskey is incredibly diverse, and it's worth exploring the styles. And even you could just sit within the contemporary Canadian blend space for a long time. There's so much diversity there. It's really fascinating what's done in that style. So that's it. Hopefully it helps you explore a bit of Canadian whiskey, and hopefully you find